lovers! Well, 2 years ago, a wonderful neighbor gave me a Worm Factory 360 for free with 2 trays full of worms and worm castings. I have since then multiplied the number of worms probably 20-fold and have been harvesting lots and lots of castings. In today's video, I am going to show you my worm factory, all of the various stages in it, and I'm also going to show you how to set up a brand new tray to keep the population growing and to keep those worm castings coming right up. First, let's start off with how does this worm factory work? The concept is very simple and relies on the principle that worms travel to where food is. So as you can see in this setup, I have multiple trays stacked one on top of the other, and each tray looks like this. It is an 18 by 18 inch square with a perforated bottom. And the idea is that you start off with tray number 1. You fill it with all the things that the worms need, and I will get to that in just a minute. And then after the worms are done creating the vermicompost in the bottom tray and that's full, you start the next tray. And you do the exact same thing. And you keep stacking and so on and so forth. And what happens is the worms travel upward because you are only feeding the topmost bin with food. So when they're done eating the food in the bottom tray, they move to the next, to the next, to the next, and so on and so forth, until eventually you are left with a tray that is filled with only vermicompost and practically no worms because they've all migrated upward. So I've unstacked the trays, and this is what the bottom looks like. It's a capture tray where water or excess moisture from these trays drip down through and get captured into, and there is a faucet which can be used to drain out that excess water, which is also called worm leachate. In other words, worm pee and any extra moisture that is coming out of the decomposing food materials that you're putting in. And this little ramp here is for worms that have fallen through and they want to get back up. So I usually regularly open this all the way to the bottom and I remove these little worms and I put them back in the worm bin. So let's start with the bottommost tray. This is the one that was closest to the bottom of the bin and will contain the most amount of worm castings and the least amount of worms. So let's take a look at what it looks like. Now, just one point is that my worm bin is an outdoor bin, which means that in addition to the red wigglers, which are the worms, the composting worms that I use, there tend to be other critters that get into this. So if you look really closely, you can see things like ants, little white crawly things. There's a living ecosystem in this bin. And all of them work towards composting the material. So as long as you're not grossed out by all these little critters, they are all your friends and they all help to decompose the material in the bin. There's this wonderful YouTuber called the Naive Urban Gardener. She recently did a video on setting up her worm bin, and she was talking about potworms. And potworms are tiny little white worms that tend to come to compost bins when there's excess moisture in them. She was talking about the moisture imbalance, and I was joking that I've got potworms, I've got, ants, I've got all kinds of critters that I don't even recognize in my worm bin. And she said that when you've got one extra critter, it's a worm bin out of balance. When you've got 30 of them, it's a living, thriving worm bin, and that's what exactly this is. So big shout out to Tress, my friend, the Naive Urban Gardener. Check out her channel, guys. She's just a really wonderful human being. In addition to being a great gardener, you will really enjoy her videos. She is so authentic. She's just a real nice person. I've never met her in person. I hope to someday, though. She lives actually not too far away from me, so shout out to you and your wonderful channel, Tress. Thank you for inspiring me and all the other gardeners that you share your wonderful knowledge as well as your life with. So if you look at the worm castings, this is all mostly worm castings. You can see there are hardly any worms, mainly because it is the bottommost bin. There are a few plants that are growing, which I think is always kind of cool. Look at the texture of the worm casting. It's kind of It's kind of sticky and kind of holds together, but it also breaks apart very easily. This is almost 100% worm casting, with the exception of, I have no idea how plastic got in here. Oh, it's a candy wrapper. But you'll also see that I've got twigs. Now, I actually consciously add twigs and things that are difficult to break down into my worm bin, but organic. And what that does is it helps maintain a nice, light, aerated setting for the worms, which they really enjoy. Let's go ahead and look at the next tray. So this here is the next level up. You can already see a few worms. There's a few bits of decomposed material still in this, but these worms will dive down fairly quickly. They do not like the sunshine. This is an avocado pit. Take a look at the worms decomposing this. I'm just amazed at how these little worms can decompose things like avocado pits. So this is the topmost tray. You can see this has the most undecomposed material in it, and I like putting things like squash that have seeds, cantaloupes, etc., because they tend to sprout in the worm bin, and then I just kind of mix it around and the seedlings die and my worms consume them. I always have a piece of cardboard that I put on top of the topmost layer where I'm feeding the worms, because worms do not like to be exposed. They like dark, they like a layer over them, and so this serves as a worm blanket, and it protects the worms underneath and it lets them get to the food at the top. If I don't have this, they tend to go one layer down. They eventually get to the food on the top, but they get to it much faster, I've found, if I put this layer on the top. If you're getting value from this video, folks, now would be a great time to hit that like button, because that really helps get this video out to a broader audience. Now let's go see how I set up a new tray for my worm bin. Is that Danny the garden cat? Hi, Danny. Now, worms like to live under plastic containers. You can see I'm trying to dive out of the light. You can see the rich worm casting as well. This is all 100% worm casting. I would never in a million years have thought that I would be able to handle a worm, but I'm able to do it now, guys. My skin does not crawl. In fact, I love these guys. Bye-bye. They're gonna dive out of the light. Oh, Danny, did you have to step on the worm? Don't do that, girl. Get away from there. You're making my worms scared. So here are the materials that I am going to be using for my worm tray setup. First off, I've got the bedding material. So this is moistened peat moss. It's got way too much water in it, so I'm going to squeeze out some of the water. What it needs to feel like is a wrung out sponge, so you should be able to, maybe get a couple of drops of water when you squeeze it, but this is more of the consistency that I'm looking for. As Callie Kim calls it, a crumbly brownie mix texture. I also like to mix in some shredded newspaper. Now, this peat moss tends to compact up a little bit, so I like to put in material that will kind of break up the texture a little bit. Shredded newspaper tends to do that, and I also like to add in shredded leaves and twigs. Now, you'll notice in the other bins that I showed you as well, I did have twigs, and I do feel that even though these do not decompose rapidly, that's the whole point actually. They help keep that aeration even as the worm castings start to form and the mixture becomes much more dense. These twigs do help keep the air pockets in the mix. I also like to add some eggshells. Now I have these pulverized eggshells. I like to use these in my worm bins because they give the worms some kind of grit that helps them digest the food better. Okay, so let's go ahead and set up this tray. I'm not going to worry too much about the water content of the bedding because it is going to drain through. That's why I'm doing it on top of this worm factory, and at the bottom it will collect along with the worm leaches, and I can drain it off over there. That's a good maybe 2 inches or so of this material, and it's all going to drain through. I'm also going to be adding some dry material to it, like these newspaper clippings, and then finally I'm adding this leaf material that also has a little bit of my garden and my natural soil in it. Now this is fairly dry. I'm actually going to have to moisten it up a little bit more. But before I do that, I'm going to add some eggshells as well. A good handful should do the job. There are no precise measurements when it comes to worm bins. You just want to make sure that you don't create an environment that doesn't have enough moisture, or does not have enough oxygen, or does not have enough food, because all of these things will cause your worm population to decrease or maybe even die. Let's go ahead and moisten this up. This is absolutely perfect. Yeah, it's got a little extra moisture in it right now, but that will all get absorbed and the excess will drain out. That's some great bedding for my little worms. So now all I need to do is add some food to this, and I don't even need to add worms to this because they are going to come up from the bottom and they're going to find the food. So that's really all there is to it. So here are my kitchen scraps. So as you can see, I've got things like banana peels, watermelon rinds, oh my gosh, worms love these. Corn, another absolute favorite food of the worms. But I've also got things like orange peels and onion skins and garlic peels. One question that I hear asked quite frequently is, should I be feeding my worms citrus and onions and garlic? And the answer is absolutely yes, you can. But you don't want to put it in very large quantities because, you want to give your worms food that they like. They tend not to like that as much, but they will eat through citrus and all kinds of stuff. So don't worry about it. You can add it. Another question that I hear asked quite frequently is, should I grind up or chop up my fruits and vegetables before I add them to the worm bin? And frankly, guys, I don't do that. Now, if you do that, the food will decompose a lot faster. But to me, I want to keep it easy. The worms will get through this. They will decompose this. It'll take a little bit longer, but hey, I'm not in any rush. Yet another question I hear is, how long does it take from the time a worm bin is set up like this to when you can actually start harvesting castings? And I would say that for maybe about between 500 to 1,000 worms in a tray like this, they will be able to work through and create that black gold that you saw in the bottom tray in roughly about 3 months or so. So that's it, folks. My worm bin is set up and ready to go. And I'm going to be making a video shortly on how to use worm castings in your garden. So if you want to subscribe and stay tuned for that, that should be coming up in the next few weeks. If you want to know a quick and easy way on how to get a 5-gallon bucket started in your garden as a worm bin, check this video right here. I also have a playlist that I will put down below here. I actually strongly recommend The Littlest Worm Farm. That is a way for you to collect red wigglers in your garden, so definitely check out that video as well. Until next time, live green and love your greens.